Picture a corridor in a palace. Now fill it with the smell of beeswax and wet wool, and the smoke of 100 candles burning in the middle of the day, because the windows are small and the walls are 3 feet thick. Add the sound of soft shoes on rush matting, the rustle of silk moving somewhere just out of sight, and underneath it all, the constant low murmur of 500 people whispering about each other. That's the court of Henry VIII, the most glamorous place in England. Also the most dangerous. A place where a man could rise from butcher's son to the second most powerful person in the kingdom, and a place where the wrong word, spoken to the wrong woman at the wrong moment, could quietly destroy the rest of your life. Tonight we're going back there. But not to follow the king. Everyone follows the king. We're going to follow a young man standing at the edge of the room, holding the cardinal's wine, trying not to be noticed. A young man who fell in love with a dark-eyed girl newly arrived from France, years before the king ever really looked at her. He loved Anne Boleyn first. He was betrothed to her, or something very close to it, and for the crime of loving the wrong woman before the most powerful man in England decided he wanted her, this man was humiliated in front of servants, dragged away from her, married off to a woman who hated him, and then, 13 years later, sick and shaking, forced to sit on the jury that condemned her to death. His name was Henry Percy, heir to the earldom of Northumberland, one of the oldest, proudest names in England, and history mostly forgot him because history is written about winners, and Henry Percy did not win anything. Not once. Not ever. We're not going to read about him tonight. We're going to be him. One life, lived from the inside. Everything he would have seen, smelled, touched, feared, and lost. So I make these history stories, and honestly, I still have no idea whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just quietly lying in the dark, enjoying stories about heartbreak, cardinals, and Tudor paperwork. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Pull the blanket up. Here we go. It is the year 1522, and you are cold. That's the first thing. Before the story, before the love, before any of it, you're cold, because it is February in London, and you're lying on a mattress stuffed with wool and straw in a chamber at York Place, the great riverside palace of Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, and the fire in the hearth died sometime in the night, and the cold has crept in under the blanket the way it always does, starting at your feet and working its way up your legs like water filling a boat. Your eyes open to darkness. For half a second you don't know where you are. Then the smell reminds you. Cold ash from the dead fire. The tallow-fat stink of a candle burned down to nothing on the chest by the door. Damp plaster because this room faces the river, and the river breathes into the walls all winter. The warm, sour animal smell of the other young men sleeping in the same chamber. 3 of them, gentlemen's sons like you, wards and servants in the cardinal's household, all breathing slow in the dark. And underneath everything, faint but constant, the smell of the Thames itself, mud and fish and things rotting at the waterline. Even here, in one of the finest palaces in England, you can never quite escape the river. Welcome to London in the winter of 1522. You are Henry Percy. You are about 20 years old, and you are the eldest son of the 5th Earl of Northumberland, which means that one day, assuming you live, which in this century is never guaranteed, you will inherit one of the greatest titles in England. The Percys have held the north for over 300 years. Your family fought at Otterburn. Your great-grandfather's grandfather was the Hotspur that everyone still tells stories about, the one who nearly took the crown off a king's head. Border lords, warlords really, with castles at Alnwick and Warkworth and Prudhoe, and thousands of men who ride when a Percy calls. None of which matters right now, because right now you are, in effect, a servant. That's how it works. That's how it has always worked. Noble families don't raise their own sons. They send them away into greater households to learn manners and service and politics by living at the bottom of someone else's hierarchy. Your father sent you here, to the household of Cardinal Wolsey, the Lord Chancellor of England, the King's right hand, the butcher's son from Ipswich who now lives more magnificently than most kings in Europe. Serving in Wolsey's household is an honour. Everyone says so. Your father said so, in that flat voice of his that makes honours sound like sentences. And so here you are, the heir to Northumberland, lying in the dark in another man's palace, listening to another young gentleman snore 2 feet away from you, waiting for a bell. The bell comes. It always comes. Somewhere in the depths of York Place, a hand pulls a rope, and the sound rolls down the corridors, and the whole vast machine of the Cardinal's household begins to move. You push the blanket back, and the cold takes you all at once like stepping into water. Your breath shows in the air. The floorboards under your bare feet are so cold they feel wet. You dress fast, the way you've learned to, fingers clumsy and stiff, fumbling with points and laces. A linen shirt gone slightly grey no matter how the laundresses boil it. Hose that you tie to your doublet with cord points, 8 of them, each one a small battle for your frozen fingers. A doublet of good black wool. You're a Percy. You dress well even at dawn. And over it a gown trimmed with fur that was a gift from your father and is the warmest thing you own. Your boots are stiff with yesterday's damp. You force your feet into them anyway. There's a basin of water on the chest by the window. A skin of ice has formed on it overnight, thin as a communion wafer. You break it with 2 fingers and splash your face, and the shock of it drives the last sleep out of you like a slap. One of the other young men groans from his bed. William, a knight's son from Kent, who talks too much and sleeps like the dead. Is it morning? It's always morning, you say, and go down to serve the most powerful commoner in the history of England his breakfast. Understand what Wolsey's household is, because it matters for everything that happens next. This is not a house. This is a small kingdom. Nearly 500 people serve the Cardinal. Some say more. He has his own council, his own treasury, his own choir that sings better than the king's, which is a genuine problem because the king has noticed. Wolsey travels with a procession like a monarch. Pillars of silver carried before him, his cardinal's hat borne on a cushion by a bare-headed nobleman, his mule, always a mule in humble imitation of Christ, draped in crimson velvet that cost more than a farm. And in this small kingdom you have a place, and your place is to stand. That's the job, mostly. Standing. You stand in the presence chamber while the cardinal receives ambassadors. You stand behind his chair at dinner and hand dishes to men more important than you, who hand them to men more important than them, who set them before the cardinal, who ignores most of them. You learn to stand for 4 hours without shifting your weight, because shifting your weight is noticed, and everything that is noticed is remembered, and everything that is remembered is eventually used. Your legs ache by mid-morning. By evening the ache has moved up into your back, a dull iron bar laid across your shoulders. You've learned tricks, pressing your toes down inside your boots, tightening and releasing the muscles of your legs so slowly that no one can see the movement. Every young man in service learns these tricks or collapses. You're not important here. That's the strange arithmetic of it. In Northumberland, your name opens gates, men kneel. Here, in this crimson household, you're one young gentleman among dozens, distinguishable mainly by the fact that your father is an earl, and your face, people tell you, always looks slightly worried. It looks worried because you are worried. You are almost always worried. It's your nature, and this century punishes your nature. You're not built like your ancestors. Hotspur would have lasted a week at court before saying something unforgivable and riding home. You last because you bend. You have been bending your whole life. Before your father, who has never once in your memory said he was pleased with you. Before the cardinal, who barely knows you exist. You bend, and you stand, and you wait. And somewhere underneath all that waiting, there is a young man who wants, badly, quietly, constantly, for someone, anyone, to look at him and actually see him. Remember that. It explains everything that's coming. Let me put you through one evening of this life, so your body knows it, and not just your ears. A feast night at York Place, one of the great ones, the kind Wolsey throws when there are Frenchmen to impress. And there are always Frenchmen to impress. Half of English diplomacy in these years is conducted through Roswan. The preparation starts at dawn and you are part of it by afternoon. The great chamber has to be dressed. The cloth of estate hung, the cupboard built, and the cupboard is not a cupboard. It is a staged mountain of plate, gold and silver-gilt vessels stacked 6 shelves high, purely to be looked at, never used, a cliff face of wealth. And you help carry the pieces up from the treasury with a yeoman counting every item in and every item out, because a single gilt cup that goes missing will be searched for through 500 people's bedding. The plate is heavier than it looks. Your fingers learn the particular cold, greasy weight of gold. The way the metal drinks the heat out of your hands through the wrapping cloths, the soft, terrible chime 2 pieces make when they touch, and everyone's head turns. By evening the chamber's a furnace of light, hundreds of wax candles. Wax, not tallow. Tallow is for people. Wax is for glory. And their honey smell fills the room along with the smoke, and the heat of them, banked with the heat of 300 bodies, means that a winter feast is somehow a thing you sweat through. You stand at your station behind the great table. The trumpets sound in the gallery for each course, a physical blast you feel in your breastbone, and then the procession of dishes comes up from the kitchens, and the kitchens are far, so there is a relay of men, and you are one of its final links. The dish arrives in your hands, say a charger of brawn with mustard, the pewter scalding through the napkin, the weight of it dragging at your wrists, and you turn and present it, kneeling, to a gentleman who presents it to a knight who sets it before the guest. And by the 3rd hour of this, your knees have learned the exact grain of the floorboards, and your wrists are strings of fire, and your face has settled into the servant's mask, pleasant, empty, sweat crawling behind your ears. And here's what you're really doing all evening, the actual work under the work. You are watching. Everyone below the salt watches everyone above it. You learn the ambassadors' faces. You learn which English lords lean together and which turn their shoulders. You learn to read a room the way a shepherd reads a sky, and you don't even know you're learning it. It just soaks in, night after night, the grammar of power. Who is served first? Who is served warm? Whose jokes are laughed at before they finish? Years from now, in a hall in the Tower with 2,000 spectators, you will read a room in one glance and know the verdict before a word is spoken, and this aching, sweating candle smoke apprenticeship is where you learned how. Sometimes the king comes, unannounced in theory, masked in theory. That is the fashion, the king and his gentlemen arriving at Wolsey's feasts disguised as shepherds or Muscovites in cloth of gold, and everyone pretending with enormous ceremony not to know that the tallest man in England, 6'2" and shoulders like a door, is the tall masked shepherd, and the cardinal pretending to guess wrong, and the delighted unmasking and the applause. You've seen this pantomime 3 times. The whole room performing surprise for a man who has never once been surprising. Understand the king through this, because it is all the introduction he needs. Henry VIII, in these years, is not yet the monster of the paintings, the vast bandaged leg, the little furious eyes. He's 30, magnificent, genuinely gifted. He sets songs, he breaks lances, he argues theology with real appetite, and he lives inside a theatre where every wall is a mirror, and he has never in his adult life heard the word no spoken to his face with nothing standing behind it. Remember that. The whole story you're living tonight is about what happens when he finally does hear it, and who ends up paying, which is, this being the 16th century, essentially everyone except him. When the feast ends past midnight, the guests reel off to their barges, and then the second feast begins. The household eats the leavings in order of rank down to the kitchen boys, and then the plate is counted back into the treasury piece by chiming piece. And then, finally, you climb the stairs on legs like wet rope, and William from Kent is already snoring, and you lie down in your clothes because the fire is dead again, and your last thought, most nights, is nothing at all. Just the dark, and your pulse in your ears, and the river breathing against the walls. That's the life. That's the machine you live in. Now let me show you the day the machine broke. The best days are the days the cardinal goes to court. Wolsey attends on the king often, at Greenwich, at Richmond, wherever the court happens to be sitting, and when he goes, his young gentlemen go with him, as decoration, essentially, living proof of his greatness. And while the cardinal's closeted with the king for hours, doing the actual work of running England, his young men are left to drift around the royal palace with nothing to do. And the place you all drift to every time without discussion, like water finding its level, is the Queen's side of the palace, because that's where the women are. Queen Catherine keeps a household of ladies and maids of honour, the daughters of the nobility, sent to court the same way you were sent to Wolsey, to be polished and seen and ideally married. The Queen's chambers are the one place at court where young men and young women can lawfully be in the same room, under the eyes of the older ladies, wrapped in the elaborate safety of the rules, and the rules are elaborate. This is the game of courtly love, and everyone plays it. A gentleman chooses a lady and serves her, writes verses to her eyebrow, wears her colours, sighs magnificently, loses to her at cards on purpose. It's supposed to mean nothing. It's a performance, a way of practicing charm the way you practice swordplay, and everyone understands the difference between the game and the real thing. Everyone is supposed to understand. On a morning in the early spring of 1522, you cross the river to Greenwich in the cardinal's barge. You will remember this day for the rest of your life, and the strange thing, the thing that will torment you later, lying awake in a cold castle in the north, is that it began like every other day. No omen, no shiver. The Thames stank the way it always stank. The oars creaked in their locks, dip and pull, and the water hissed along the hull, and you sat wedged between 2 other gentlemen with the wind off the river finding every gap in your clothes, watching London slide past, the wharves and cranes, the forest of ships' masts below the bridge, the tower grey and squat on its hill, with ravens turning above it. You didn't look at the tower for long. Nobody does. It's not that kind of building. Greenwich rises up on the south bank, red brick and glittering windows, the king's favourite palace, the one he was born in. The barge bumps the landing stage. You climb out, and your boots ring on wet stone, and a liveried servant takes the mooring rope, and the cardinal is already moving up toward the palace with his pillar-bearers and his cross-bearers and his entire portable theatre of importance, and you fall in behind him, one more black and crimson figure in the procession. And then the waiting begins, and then the drifting begins, and by mid-morning you are standing in the long gallery on the Queen's side with William from Kent and two other gentlemen, and William is talking as always, and you are half listening as always. And then a door opens down the gallery, and a group of the Queen's maids comes through in a rustle of skirts and low laughter. And one of them is new. You notice her the way you notice a wrong note in music. Not because she's the most beautiful woman in the room. She isn't. And this is the thing the ballads always get wrong about her, and it matters, so let's be precise. By the standards of 1522, beauty means fair, golden hair, white skin, blue eyes, a soft round face. That's the fashion. That's what the poets praise. That's what her own sister has, more or less. Which is part of why her own sister is currently, quietly, the king's mistress. Though you don't know that yet, and neither does most of the court. This girl is the opposite of the fashion. Dark hair, so dark it's nearly black, mostly hidden under a French hood, and even the hood is wrong, or rather, new. The English ladies wear gable hoods that hide every strand of hair and frame the face in stiff angles like a house roof, and she wears the French style curved, set back, showing the dark hair smoothed away from her forehead, and somehow that half-inch of visible hair is the most modern thing you've ever seen. Her skin is sallow rather than fair, her neck is long, her eyes are black or near enough, and they move around the gallery once, taking in everything, the men, the women, the hangings, you, with a speed and completeness that is frankly unsettling, like being counted. "That's the Boleyn girl," William murmurs. "The other one, just back from France. 7 years at the French court, they say, since she was a child." Anne Boleyn, daughter of Sir Thomas Boleyn, a diplomat, clever and ambitious and not especially rich. A family on the way up. Grandfather a merchant. Great connections through the mother, who is a Howard, sister to the Duke of Norfolk. Middling people, by your family standards. Your father would need a moment to even place the name. 7 years in France. You understand within about 4 minutes of watching her what 7 years in France means. It means she moves differently. The Queen's other maids stand. Anne Boleyn arranges herself. They laugh. She deploys laughter precisely where it will do the most work. When a gentleman says something clever to the group, the other girls look down as they've been taught. Anne looks directly at him and says something cleverer back, fast, with a small French shrug, and the whole group reforms around her like iron filings around a magnet, and she doesn't even seem to notice it happening, except that of course she notices. She notices everything. You will learn that about her. She is the most attentive person you will ever meet, and when all of that attention turns on you, when those black eyes stop and hold and actually see you, well, remember what I told you about the young man who wanted, more than anything, to be seen. It doesn't happen all at once. That's the other thing the ballads get wrong. It happens over weeks, over months, in scraps and fragments, in the narrow lawful spaces the rules allow. The cardinal goes to court once or twice a week. You follow, you drift to the Queen's side, and every time, without deciding to, you find yourself listening for one particular voice. She sings. All the maids sing, but she sings the way she does everything, better than she needs to, with the little grace notes she learned in France. She plays the lute with long fingers, and you stand across the chamber pretending to talk to William, and watching her hands on the strings, the small press and slide of her fingertips, the tiny squeak of gut string under skin, and you lose whole sentences of whatever William is saying. One afternoon there is dancing. There is often dancing. The king loves it, therefore the court loves it, and the Queen's chamber is cleared, and the musicians tune, and the couples form, and you, through a series of small shufflings that you absolutely engineered while appearing not to, end up opposite Anne Boleyn. The dance is a pavane first, slow, processional, all touching of hands. Her hand lands on yours, light as a bird, cool at the fingertips, and you feel the calluses on her fingers from the lute strings, little pads of hardened skin, and this detail undoes you completely. She's real. She has worked at something until it marked her hands. Every court lady is presented to you as an ornament, and here is evidence of effort, of hours alone with an instrument, and you hold that small, rough-tipped hand as though it were made of glass and steer her through the turns, and cannot think of a single word to say. She says it for you. You're the Percy heir. Not a question. That inventory-taking glance from the first day. You were in it, filed, remembered. The one who stands behind the cardinal looking as though he expects the ceiling to fall. The ceilings in my Lord Cardinal's house are very fine, you manage. It would be a great loss. It's not brilliant, it's the best you have. But she laughs. Not the deployed laugh. You'll learn to tell the difference, but a short, surprised, genuinely amused sound, quickly controlled. And the dance turns her away from you, and turns her back, and she looks at you again with something new in the look, a flicker of reassessment, a refiling, and she says, "And what loss would you be, my lord, if the ceiling fell?" "None at all," you say. "There are men enough to carry wine." "That," she says, "is either humility or self-pity, and I haven't decided which. And I find I should like to." And that's it. That's the whole conversation. The music ends, you bow, she curtsies, the ladies withdraw, and you stand there in the emptying chamber feeling as though someone has reached into your chest and turned something a quarter turn, some screw or key you didn't know was there, and nothing sits quite the same way in you afterward. Ever again, actually. But you don't know that part yet. What you know is this. For the length of one dance, the most interesting person you've ever met found you worth deciding about. After that, you engineer everything. You learn her patterns the way a poacher learns a wood. Which mornings the Queen hears Mass in the chapel and which maids attend her. Which gallery catches the sun in the afternoon because Anne, French-trained, walks there for her health, while English girls sit sewing in the warm fug of the chamber. You learn that she argues about books. Actual argument, actual books, theology even, dangerous new ideas out of France that she discusses with a levelness that would alarm a bishop. You learn that she is proud, prouder than her family's rank strictly supports, and that the other maids resent her a little for it, and that she knows they do, and holds her chin up anyway, and something in that fragile, defiant pride calls out to something in you, because you know what it costs to hold a position all day while your legs ache. You've been doing it for years. You just do it standing behind a chair, and she does it with her whole life. You start playing the game with her, the lawful game, the courtly game. You wear her colours at the tennis play. You lose to her at cards, at first deliberately and then quickly, genuinely, because she is better at cards than you are, better at primero than half the men at court. She counts what's been played. You can see her doing it, the tiny stillness behind the eyes, and she takes your money with the serenity that would be infuriating from anyone else. Small money, pennies and groats. She stacks your coins in a neat little tower in front of her, tap, tap, aligning the edges with one fingertip, and raises an eyebrow at you. Again, again, always again. You would lose coins to her forever. There is one evening from these months that history happens to have kept, and since we have it, let's stand in it. Shrove Tuesday, the 4th of March, 1522. Before Lent shuts the court's mouth for 40 days, the Cardinal throws a great entertainment at York Place for the imperial ambassadors, and the centrepiece is a pageant, and the pageant has a name, the Château Vert, the Green Castle. They build it at one end of the great chamber, an actual castle of timber and painted canvas, 3 towers, battlements covered in green foil that shivers in the candlelight, and in the castle are stationed 8 ladies of the court, each playing a virtue, each with her name stitched in gold on her headdress. Beauty, honour, constancy, kindness. And defending the castle below, 8 ladies, boys of the chapel, actually dressed as women, playing the ugly virtues opposites, danger, disdain, jealousy, scorn, and then 8 masked lords assault the castle, led, masked, in theory, always in theory, by the king himself, and the weapons of the siege are dates and oranges, actual fruit, hurled up at the battlements, and the ladies defend themselves with comfits, and rose water poured down on the attackers' heads, and the whole gorgeous, absurd machine of it ends, as it is built to end, with the castle taken, and each lord leading a captured virtue down to dance. You're in the crowd of the household against the wall watching, and in the castle, playing one of the 8 virtues, is Anne Boleyn, newly come to court, given a part in the greatest entertainment of the season, and the part they gave her, the name stitched over her dark hair. And I promise you, I am not inventing this. The record survives. Perseverance. Her sister Mary is up there too, playing kindness, and the king's affair with kindness is either beginning or about to. The timing is murky, and the irony is not. And the king in his mask storms the castle, and the oranges fly, and the rose water comes down, and the hall roars, and the castle falls, and the lords lead down their prizes, and the music strikes up, and you stand against the wall with the smell of crushed orange peel and candle smoke and 100 perfumes, watching a girl labelled Perseverance dance in the candlelight, and you have no way, none, of knowing what you're looking at. That in one tableau, in one silly, gorgeous evening of fruit throwing, the whole next 20 years of English history is standing on a plywood battlement. The king, the sister he will take, the sister he will kill, and the word perseverance that will bring down a church. You just think she dances well. You just stand there, 20 years old, with sticky candied fruit someone pressed into your hand, thinking that the gold letters catch the light when she turns. That is what living inside history actually feels like. Nothing. It feels like an evening. And here is where the story turns, so quietly that neither of you hears it turning. Somewhere in the winter of 1522 into 1523, the game stops being the game. You can even name the moment, or the one you'll choose later to be the moment. A wet afternoon. The Queen's chambers close and crowded, rain rattling the glass, the fire smoking because the wind is wrong, everyone's wool clothes steaming faintly, that damp sheep smell of a Tudor room in the rain. You're at the card table. She's beaten you twice. And a gentleman across the room, older, drunker than the hour excuses, says something about the French, some sneer about French manners and French morals and the sort of things young ladies pick up at the French court, and he doesn't name her, he doesn't have to, and the room does that court thing where everyone hears and no one reacts, and you watch her take the hit. You're close enough to see it land. Nothing moves in her face, as she's far too good for that, but her hand, her lute-calloused hand, goes still on the cards for 1 second, and the knuckles whiten just slightly, just for a breath, and then she plays her card as if nothing at all has happened. And you hear yourself say, clearly across the room, "The French court taught the lady to play primero, sir. What's your excuse?" Silence. Then laughter. The room laughs with you, at him, because your father is an earl and his isn't, and that's how the arithmetic of laughter works here. The drunk gentleman goes red and finds somewhere else to be. You didn't plan it. That's the point. Careful Henry Percy, bending Henry Percy, the young man who has spent his whole life calculating the safety of every word before releasing it, and the words were out of you before any calculation could catch them. You defended her by reflex in public at cost, and when you turn back to the table, Anne Boleyn is looking at you. Not the inventory look, not the fencing look from the dance. She looks at you as though you've surprised her, and you understand in that moment that she is almost never surprised, that surprising her is perhaps the rarest thing a man can do, and that you have just done it. "Your play, my lord," she says quietly. You put down entirely the wrong card. She takes your money, and under the table, briefly, for less time than it takes to say it, her fingers touch the back of your hand. Deliberately, unmistakably, "Thank you." And then they're gone, and the rain rattles the glass and the fire smokes, and the world has changed completely, and no one in the room knows it but the two of you. I need to stop here and tell you what you're risking, because you know it, even as you're doing it, and the knowing is part of what it feels like. You're not free. That's the plain fact under everything. You're the heir to an earldom, and heirs to earldoms are not people. They are assets. Your marriage is not yours to make. It is a treaty, a land deal, an alliance, and it has in fact already been half made years ago, without much reference to you. Your father and the Earl of Shrewsbury have long had an understanding that you will marry Shrewsbury's daughter, Mary Talbot. You have met Mary Talbot. She has a firm jaw and a firmer opinion of everything, and looks at you the way a housewife looks at a fish of doubtful freshness. The understanding is not yet a signed contract. Negotiations over money and land grind on the way these things do. But in the world you were born into, it is as good as done. Two great northern houses joined, neat, sensible, loveless as a fence post. But nobody has ever once asked whether you find it loveless, because the question is meaningless. Love is what the poems are about. Marriage is what the lawyers are about. every person of your rank in England understands that these are two different subjects. And Anne is not free either, not really. There's talk of matching her to her Irish cousin James Butler to settle a family quarrel over the Ormond inheritance. The Cardinal himself has had a hand in that negotiation. She is a piece on the board too. A smaller piece than you, which makes what you're about to do worse, not better, because when pieces move themselves, it is always the smaller piece that gets taken. You know all this. She knows all this. She knows it better than you, in fact. She's cleverer than you, and you know that too, and it's one of the things you love about her, and it means she sees the cliff edge more clearly than you do, even as the two of you walk toward it holding hands. Because that's what the following months are. A walk toward a cliff taken in tiny lawful steps. A word in the gallery, both of you facing the window, watching the rain. Not each other. Voices pitched under the sound of it. A book passed between you. She lends you a volume of French verse, and you sit up half the night in the cold with a candle stub, working through it with your schoolboy French, and find a hair, one long dark hair, laid in the fold of a page like a bookmark, and you cannot tell if it is accident or message, and you fold the page closed again very carefully with the hair inside like a relic. Gifts, small enough to be deniable. She embroiders. Badly she hates it. She does it because maids of honour must, and gives you, with a perfectly straight face, the single worst-worked handkerchief in the history of English needlecraft. The initials so crooked they might be anyone's, and says, "So that you remember I'm not good at everything," and you carry that scrap of botched linen inside your doublet against your ribs for the next year, and some nights, in the dark of the shared chamber at York Place, you press your hand flat over the place where it sits, and feel your own heart knocking under it. Micro moments. That's what a secret love is made of, in a world with no privacy. You're almost never alone together. Understand that. In perhaps a year and a half of loving Anne Boleyn, the time you spend actually alone with her, truly out of all sight and hearing, amounts to, what, an hour, scattered in coins of 2 and 3 minutes each, a turn of a stare taken slowly, a moment in a window bay while the music covers you. Once, gloriously, a whole quarter-hour in the Queen's Garden at Greenwich, when the ladies walked out after dinner and the paths did their work of separating the party, and you walked beside her between clipped hedges with the smell of wet box leaves and river mud, and her sleeve brushed yours 7 times. You counted. You're not proud of it. You counted. And on the 8th time it was not the sleeve, it was her hand sliding into yours, cool fingers and calloused fingertips gripping hard, one hard grip like a person catching themselves on a rail, and she said, looking straight ahead at the hedge, "This is very foolish, my lord." "Yes," you said, "you're contracted elsewhere, or nearly." "Nearly," you said. "Nearly is not a marriage. Men have broken nearlies before. Not men whose fathers hold the north." Her voice was flat and quick. The counting card's voice. The voice of a woman who has already run every branch of the game ahead. "And I have no fortune to speak of, and my family are new, and yours are old as the border stones, and your father will look at me and see a diplomat's daughter with a merchant grandfather, and he will say no. You know he will say no. Then I won't ask him." She stopped walking. The gravel crunched and went silent under you both. Down the path, faintly, one of the older ladies was laughing at something. A blackbird was making its evening noise in the hedge. The whole ordinary world was continuing about 6 feet away from the two of you standing at the centre of it, and she turned and looked up at you with those black eyes, and for For once, you could read them with no cleverness in the way, and what was in them was fear and hope and a kind of furious disbelieving question. You would do that? You? And listen. She was right to ask it like that, because here is the truth about you, the truth this whole story turns on. You are not brave. You have never been brave. You're gentle and anxious and eager to please, and frightened of your father, and frightened of the cardinal, and you have spent 20 years learning to bend so that you would never have to find out whether you could break instead. But every man has one rebellion in him. One. Some spend it young, and some die with it unspent, rattling around inside them like a coin in a box. You spent yours on her. There are witnesses in every marriage but two that matter, you said. It came out steadier than you felt. God and the two who promise. The rest is lawyers. Which is, and I want to be honest because you deserve honesty, lying there in the dark 500 years later, which is legally sort of true and practically an act of madness. But it was also the doctrine, and here we have to pause for 1 minute of law. Because this piece of law is a loaded gun that we're now placing on the table, and it will go off twice before this story ends, and both times it will hit someone you love. In the England of the 1520s, you did not need a priest to make a marriage. You did not need a church, banns, a ring, or a single witness. Under canon law, if a man and a woman of age said to each other, in words of the present tense, "I take thee as my wife, I take thee as my husband," that was arguably a binding contract. Per verba de praesenti, the lawyers called it. Words of the present tense. Consummation sealed it beyond dispute, but even the words alone could be held to bind. Which meant that all over England, in gardens and stairwells and haylofts, young people were creating, with one whispered sentence, legal facts that take years and fortunes to untangle. Whole church courts existed substantially to clean up after sentences spoken in gardens. I'm not going to tell you exactly what words passed between you and Anne Boleyn in that garden or in the weeks after, because nobody alive knows. The historians still argue about it. Some say a true precontract, present tense words, the full-loaded gun. Some say only a promise to marry in the future, a betrothal, an engagement, breakable with pain, but breakable. What we know is this. It was enough. Enough that you both considered yourselves bound. Enough that word of it began, as word of everything at court always does, to leak. Enough that within a few years the King of England's own lawyers would be digging through it like men probing a wall for a crack. And enough that on a spring evening in 1523 a page in the Cardinal's livery finds you in the long gallery at York Place and says, with the blank face pages learn to wear when the message is bad, "My Lord Cardinal will speak with you. Not tomorrow, not at your convenience. Now." The walk to the Cardinal's presence chamber takes perhaps 2 minutes. You will remember it in pieces for the rest of your life. The rushes on the floor releasing their dusty summer smell under your boots. A servant carrying candles the other way, pressing to the wall to let you pass, not meeting your eye. And that the not meeting your eye is the first true confirmation, because servants always know first. The door, the carved door with the Cardinal's arms on it. The 2 ushers who open it without being asked, which means you are expected, which means this has been arranged, which means whatever is behind this door has already been decided, and you're only being brought in to have it happen to you. And it is worse than you feared, because the room is full. Understand, Wolsey could have done this privately. a word in a closet, man to man, quiet as a confession. He is the subtlest politician in England. He calibrates everything. Nothing he does is accidental. So when you step through the door and find the great chamber peopled, gentlemen of the household, officers, servants of the chamber standing along the walls, your own peers, boys you sleep beside, William from Kent somewhere in that mass of faces carefully looking at nothing, understand that the audience is the point. The audience is the punishment. You're about to be made into a lesson, and a lesson needs a class. The cardinal sits at the far end. Crimson satin, the Great Seal's master, the second man in England, fat and brilliant and tired, and he lets you walk the whole length of the room in silence. That walk is 30 feet and takes 10 years. Your boots are the only sound. Your face is burning before a word is spoken. You can feel it, the heat crawling up your neck, and you hate your own skin for confessing before you've been accused. Then he begins, and we actually know more or less what he said, because standing in that room, watching, is a gentleman usher named George Cavendish, who will serve Wolsey to the end and afterward write down everything he saw. And this scene he saw with his own eyes, and set down while it still smarted. So this is not legend, this is testimony. I marvel not a little, the cardinal says, and his voice is not raised. It never needs to be. The room does the amplifying. At thy peevish folly, that thou wouldst tangle and insure thyself with a foolish girl yonder in the court. I mean Anne Boleyn. Foolish girl. 2 words, and they are doing surgery. Not a lady. Not Mistress Boleyn. A foolish girl yonder, as if she were something left lying about, a dropped glove, a servant's daughter. Dost thou not consider the estate that God hath called thee unto in this world? He goes on, unhurried, laying the sentences on you like stones on a pressed man. After thy father's death, thou art like to inherit one of the most worthy earldoms of this realm, and therefore it had been most meet for thee to have sued for the consent of thy father, and to have made the king's highness privy thereto. The king, note the king, remember the king, tucked into the middle of the scolding like a needle in wool, requiring then his princely favour, submitting all thy whole proceeding in such matters unto his highness, who would have matched thee according to thine estate and honour. Matched thee. You are a horse. You are being told before an audience of everyone you live among that you are breeding stock that has jumped the wrong fence. And now, the room. Now the physical fact of standing there. Your hands. Where do hands go? You clasp them and it looks penitent. You drop them and they hang like a puppet's. There is nowhere in the world to put your hands. Sweat starts under your arms, down your spine, a slow cold crawl, and the fur-trimmed gown you were so glad of this morning becomes an oven. Your knees have begun very slightly to shake. Not visibly. You pray not visibly, but you can feel the tremor arriving in the long muscles of your thighs, the same tremor as after hours of standing, except you have been standing for 2 minutes. Somewhere along the wall someone shifts their feet on the rushes, a tiny crunch, and the smallness of the sound tells you how enormous the silence is. His father intends to have bestowed him otherwise, Wolsey says to the room now, over your head, about you, in the third person, which is somehow the worst violence yet. And I have made the king privy to this matter, and his highness is much offended. The king is offended. You will chew on that sentence for the rest of your life, and so, frankly, have historians for 500 years. Why is the king offended? The official reason, the stated reason. because a peer's heir has entangled himself without royal permission, disrupting an orderly marriage market that the Crown likes kept orderly. And that reason is real. It's enough on its own. But Cavendish, the usher, the witness, writing years later with no reason left to flatter anyone, Cavendish says there was another reason. He says the king was already, secretly, looking at Anne Boleyn himself and set the cardinal on to break the match for his own purposes. Modern historians mostly doubt the timing. The king's pursuit of Anne probably comes later, a couple of years later. In 1523 he still has her sister. Maybe Cavendish, knowing the ending, read it backward into the beginning. Maybe. Or maybe a man who stood in the room heard something in his master's voice that the documents don't hold. You, standing on the rushes with your knees trembling, you know none of this. You only know that you have somehow, by loving one particular girl among all the girls in England, pulled down the attention of the two most powerful men in the kingdom onto your own head, and that attention, here, is a form of weather. It kills. And here, right here, is the moment I want you to watch, because it is the finest moment of Henry Percy's whole recorded life, and it lasts about 15 seconds. He answers back. Cavendish saw it. The young man, weeping. Yes, you're weeping now, before all of them, the tears entirely beyond your power to stop, running hot down a burning face, and you speak anyway, voice cracking, and you say, "Sir, I knew nothing of the king's pleasure therein, and I am sorry for it. I considered that I was of good years, and thought myself able to provide me a convenient wife where my fancy served me best. And though she be but a simple maid, having but a knight to her father, yet she's descended of right noble parentage, her mother of the Norfolk blood, her father come of the Earls of Ormond. And why should I then, sir, be anything scrupulous to match with her, whose descent is equivalent with mine when I shall be in most dignity? Listen to what the boy is doing, weeping, shaking, 21 years old before the whole household, and he is making a legal argument. He is defending her pedigree point by point like a herald. She is not a foolish girl. She is noble on both sides. She is worthy. He cannot stop crying, and he will not stop arguing. And then he says the sentence, the one Cavendish never forgot, the one that is the true epitaph of this whole story. In this matter I have gone so far before so many worthy witnesses that I know not how to withdraw myself, nor how to discharge my conscience. I have gone so far that I know not how to withdraw. He's telling the Lord Chancellor of England in front of witnesses that there is a contract. Words have been spoken that bind. This is the loaded gun on the table, and the boy, God help him, is pointing at it. And Wolsey looks at him. Cavendish says the cardinal turned to the room, to the servants along the walls, and said, wonderingly, contemptuously, like a man showing his household a curiosity, "Lo, sirs, ye may see what wisdom is in this wilful boy's head." Wilful boy, to the walls, to the audience. And then the sentence that ends it. I thought that when thou heardest me declare the king's intended pleasure, thou wouldst have relented. There is no relenting to be discussed. There is no argument to be had. The king's pleasure has been declared, and the only thing left of you is the time it takes you to submit. They send for your father. Your father is in the north when the letters go out, and the north is far. 300 miles of bad road. So you have days, perhaps 2 weeks, of waiting, and the waiting is its own particular torture, and I want you to live in it for a moment, because this is the part the history books skip. The books go from scolding to submission in one sentence. You had to live the sentence out in days. You still serve. That's the thing. The machine of the household does not stop because your life has broken inside it. The next morning the bell rings and you rise in the cold and dress with fingers that fumble worse than usual, and you go down and stand behind the cardinal's chair, and you hand dishes, and the room is full of everyone who watched, and nobody says a word about it, and everybody knows. You can feel the knowing on your skin like weather. Conversations tilt away from you when you approach. William from Kent is kind to you in a careful funeral visit way that is worse than mockery. Once, crossing the base court, you hear two grooms laughing before they see you, and they stop when they see you, and stopping is the cruelest thing they could have done, because now every silence in the palace might be about you, and most of them are. Your body keeps a ledger of it. You stop being able to eat properly. The food sits in your throat. You push it about the trencher and swallow enough not to be noticed. You sleep in fragments, waking at every bell with your heart already running. Your hands develop a small tremor at rest that you learn to hide by keeping them occupied, gripping a cup, folding a napkin, pressing flat against your thigh. This is worth remembering. Mark this fraying. This young man whose body has started to eat itself under strain, because his body will do this again at every crisis of his life, harder each time, until at last it kills him. Some men break loudly, once. You're being taught to break quietly, on a schedule, and you cannot reach her. That is the worst of it. The Queen's household closes around Anne like a fist. Whether she is watched, warned, or simply wise enough to give them nothing, you don't know. No word comes, no book, no botched embroidery, nothing. Twice you see her at a distance across a crowded chamber at Greenwich, and both times she is magnificently, deliberately ordinary, laughing at the right things, standing with the other maids, never once letting her eyes cross the room to you. And you understand that this is a message, the only one she can send. I am giving them nothing. Do the same. And you also understand that you are not strong enough to be grateful for it. You wanted her to look. God forgive you. You wanted her to be destroyed enough to look. Then your father comes. He comes with the dust of 300 miles on him and goes first. Mark this, not to you, to the Cardinal. They are closeted together for an hour while you wait in the gallery with your hands pressed flat against your thighs, and when the 5th Earl of Northumberland finally sends for his son, the interview happens in a borrowed chamber in another man's palace, which is somehow the perfect settee for your entire relationship. Cavendish preserved this speech too, or the shape of it. Your father does not shout either. Great men, while learning, never shout. Volume is for people whose words carry no weight of their own. He looks at you for a long moment, travel-stained, grey-bearded, the man who holds the eastern marches against Scotland with his name alone, and he says, in effect, and in part in these very words, "Son, thou hast always been a proud, presumptuous, disdainful, and very unthrift waster. What joy, what comfort, what pleasure or solace should I conceive of thee? Proud, presumptuous, disdainful, unthrift, waster. 5 stones laid on one at a time. And then the sentence under the sentences, the one that actually breaks you. He tells you calmly that if you do not submit, he has other sons. He says it almost mildly. Thank God, he says, he has more choice of boys than thee. He will make one of your brothers his heir. 300 years of Percy's, Hotspur's blood, Alnwick and Warkworth and the whole cold kingdom of the north, lifted off your shoulders and handed in one conditional clause to your brother Thomas or your brother Ingram, and do not think for a moment he cannot do it, and do not think for a moment he will not. And there it is, the whole engine of the world brought to bear on one exhausted young man, the cardinal, the king, the father, the earldom, the dead ancestors, the living brothers. On one side of the scale, all of that. On the other side, a girl with lute calluses and black eyes who once gripped your hand in a garden like a person catching a rail. You are 21. You have not eaten properly in 2 weeks. You have one rebellion in you, and you have already spent it in a garden on a promise you now cannot keep. You submit. I wish I could tell you otherwise. I wish this were the story where the boy says no and rides north and marries her in a village church, and the ballad ends happily somewhere in a small manor with dogs. It is not that story. You break. You put your name to what they require. The lawyers are brought in because of what you said before, witnesses about having gone too far, and whatever passed between you and Anne is examined and smothered and declared, formally, to be nothing. No contract, no impediment, a boy's folly. The butler match for Anne has quietly fallen through by now, but that no longer concerns you. Nothing about her is allowed to concern you ever again, and the old understanding with the Earl of Shrewsbury is dusted off, hurried forward, nailed down. You're to marry Mary Talbot, as was always intended, as if the last year and a half had never happened at all. Anne is sent from court. Her father is ordered to take her home, and she vanishes from your world to Hever Castle in Kent, a moated manor among orchards, comfortable, pretty, and for a young woman built for the centre of the world, a prison with good gardens. She goes, they say, in a rage. She's reported to have said, and whether she truly said it or the story grew afterward, it is exactly what she would have said, that if it ever lay in her power, she would work the cardinal as much displeasure as he had done her. Remember that sentence. It is the only threat in this whole story that is carried out in full. Do you two say goodbye? History records no farewell. The households were closed to each other. The fathers were watching. The cardinal was watching. Probably there was nothing. Probably the last time you ever spoke to Anne Boleyn freely, you did not know it was the last time, and it was some small nothing in a crowded room, a half sentence about music or weather, interrupted. That is how the great losses actually happen, not at cliff edges, with speeches, in doorways, mid-sentence, with someone calling your name from another room. You're married to Mary Talbot in, most likely, the year 1524, at somewhere around 22 years old. Of the wedding itself, the less said the better, and the records oblige by saying almost nothing. Imagine it, though. You have to live it, so imagine it. A great church, 2 great families, the smell of incense and candle smoke, and hundreds of bodies in their best wool and fur. Your hand taking a hand that is not the hand it learned. Words of the present tense, I take thee. The same formula, the very same loaded words you may already have spoken once in a garden, now spoken again at an altar, publicly, correctly, deadly, and somewhere in your chest as you say them, a voice observing with terrible calm, these words are a lie, and you know to whom they belonged, and God knows it too. The feast afterward, the candied fruits, the spiced wine you drink too much of, the musicians, the jokes, being put to bed, as custom demands, with ceremony and laughter, by people delighted at the joining of Percy and Talbot, none of whom have asked even once in the entire proceeding a single question to which your happiness was the answer. The marriage is a catastrophe. Not slowly, immediately, and then for 14 years. Let me give you one scene from it, one only, and it can stand for 14 years. A supper, early in the marriage, in the great chamber at Wrestle, the Percy house in Yorkshire, all stone and hangings and draughts that move the tapestries like slow breathing. The two of you at one end of a table built for 40. Servants along the walls, because there are always servants along the walls. You have not eaten a private meal since childhood, and neither has she. Your entire war will be conducted in front of an audience trained to see nothing. The food comes and goes. Capon, a mess of stewed leeks, wine that has travelled badly. The fire snaps. Her knife clicks against the plate. She cuts everything very small, very precisely, and you have already learned to read the clicks the way a sailor reads a sky. Fast clicking is a storm making. Tonight it is fast. Somewhere in the last day a report has reached her, a version of the York Place story, some new version. There is always a new version, each one crueler and more vivid. And finally she sets down the knife and aligns it with the plate edge and says, to the middle distance, in a voice of perfect conversational lightness so that the servants can pretend not to hear it, "They tell me the whole court wept for you. I had not known I married so tender a heart. And you say nothing. That is your weapon, the only one your nature issues you. Silence, absence, the bent head. And your nothing is fuel, as it always is, as both of you know it will be." And her voice stays light and the sentences get worse. And the servants study the tapestries and the fire snaps. And at the end of it, the two of you retire to separate chambers in the same freezing house, each utterly certain of having been the one wronged. And the poison of it, the true poison, the one that keeps this marriage killing you both for over a decade, is that you are both right. She was handed a husband whose heart was publicly, notoriously elsewhere, and no pride in England could digest that. You were handed a wife as the terms of your surrender, the living seal on the document of your own breaking, and every sight of her face renews the defeat. Two prisoners chained at the wrist, blaming each other for the chain. The men who forged it, the fathers, the cardinal, do not attend these suppers. They never do. Understand Mary Talbot fairly, because she is a victim of this story too, and she knew it from the first week. She is a proud woman from a proud house, and she's been handed a husband who was publicly, notoriously, humiliatingly in love with someone else. The whole court knows the story. Do you imagine it did not travel to her, embellished, before the wedding? She has married a man who is scolded like a schoolboy before a hall full of servants for wanting another woman, and everyone she meets for the rest of her life will know it, and pity her, and the pity will be a stone in her shoe forever. She did not choose you any more than you chose her. Two people sentenced to each other. You do not forgive her for not being Anne. She does not forgive you for the same crime. And so the two of you retreat to the north, to the great cold Percy castles, and set about the long work of making each other miserable. One more thing happens before the north swallows you, and you should have it, because it is the cruelest small thing in the whole account. Anne comes back. Her exile to Hereford does not last forever, a year, 2. The family works its connections. The storm passes, as storms do for people who are not its centre, and by the mid-1520s she is once more at court, once more among the Queen's ladies, wittier and harder and more finished than before, gathering about her the brightest circle in the palace. Her brother George, the poets, the musicians, Thomas Wyatt with his dangerous verses. And you are still, in these first years, a man who must sometimes come to court. Your rank requires it, the North's business requires it. And so it happens, more than once, that you stand in a chamber that contains her, and nothing happens. That is the cruelty. Nothing is permitted to happen. Nothing does happen. You're a married man. She is a maid with her way to make and a scar on her name that you put there. Every eye in every room knows the old story and watches idly, hopefully, for a flicker to gossip about. So the two of you conduct in public over years a flawless performance of two people to whom nothing ever occurred. A bow of exactly the correct depth, a curtsy of exactly the correct depth, my Lord of Northumberland, Mistress Boleyn, 8 or 10 words about nothing, in front of everyone, in the flat bright voices of strangers, and then the room's currents carry you apart, and that is all, that is everything, that is the entire remaining content of the great love of your life, a bow, a curtsy, the weather. Thomas Wyatt, who loved her too in these years. Everyone loved her. It was practically a fashion. She managed her admirers the way a banker manages accounts. Wyatt left a poem about giving her up, when the king's interest made all other interest lethal, and one line of it has lasted 500 years, and it can stand for you as well as him. Noli me tangere, for Caesar's I am. Touch me not, for Caesar's I am. Wyatt got a poem out of it, and eventually a cell in the tower with a window, they say, that overlooked the scaffold. You got the north, and now the story slows, the way a life slows, and the years begin to move the way years actually move, not as chapters, but as weather. You go north, and the north, after London, is another planet. Northumberland in the 1520s is not a county so much as a frontier. The border with Scotland is 60 miles of moor and crag and dale, where the king's law runs thin, and the old law, the raid, the feud, the blood price, runs deep. The riding families, English and Scottish alike, cross the line by moonlight to lift cattle and burn barns, and it is the Percys, more than anyone, who are supposed to stop them. This is what your family is for. This is why the earldom exists. Your days fill up with it. There is a strange mercy in that. Grief needs employment, and the border provides. You learn, slowly, imperfectly, because you are not Hotspur, and everyone from the grooms to the wardens quietly measures you against Hotspur, the actual work of the marches. The musters on cold hillsides at dawn, rows of men in leather jacks, breath steaming, the smell of horse and oiled steel and wet bracken. The garrison ledgers, the endless disputes, this man's cattle, that man's tower, this widow's black rent paid to a Scottish riding surname for protection the law cannot give her. You ride in weather that gets into the joints of the hands and stays. You learn what a burned farmstead smells like 2 days after. Wet char, sour smoke, a sweetness underneath you learn not to ask about. Live one of those nights with him, because the North deserves its due, and because it is the only place in this story where anything is simple. A November night, 2 or 3 years into the marriage. Word has come in at dusk. Riders seen fording the Till, 30 horse, maybe more, Scots by their road, heading for the villages under Doddington. And so the beacon is lit on the tower, and the answering points of fire wake along the hills one by one like slow sparks down a fuse, and the muster forms in your courtyard in the dark. 40 men, then 60, arriving in ones and twos out of the blackness, steel caps, leather jacks quilted hard enough to turn a blade, lances upright against the stars. The horses stamp and blow. Someone's dog will not stop barking. A man laughs, short and high, the way men laugh before this kind of work, and you ride out at their head, because that is the whole meaning of your name, and the cold comes at you like a wall. Not London cold, border cold, off the North Sea and over 60 miles of open moor, a cold that finds the rivets of your jack and comes in through them, that turns the reins to rods of ice in your fists, so that after the first hour you cannot properly feel your fingers and guide the horse from the wrist and knee. The moon is down. You ride by the paleness of the track and the hearing of the man in front, hoof-fall and creak of leather and the wet cough of horses, and once, far off to the north, a sound that might be cattle being driven hard and might be wind. You do not catch them. You usually do not catch them. That is the truth of border war. It is a war of arithmetic and terror, not battles. You come over the last ridge as the sky greys and find what they left. A farmstead with its roof burned in, still smoking, the byre empty, the cattle gone north with the dark. The farmer is alive. His wife is alive. They stand in the mud in front of the ruin with their children around them like chicks and watch you ride in. You, the Percy, the Lord, the Law. And the man pulls off his cap with hands black to the wrist and says nothing at all, and his face is not grief, and it is not anger. It is accounting. He is calculating right in front of you whether he can live till spring. You give him money. You always give them money. It is half of why you are drowning in debt, this endless bleeding of coins into burned mornings, and your officers frown at it, and you keep doing it, because it is the only part of the work your hands can actually perform. You cannot bring back cattle over the border with a lawsuit. You cannot make the marches safe. 300 years of your ancestors could not make the marches safe. But you can put silver into a black-fingered hand and see the accounting behind a man's eyes tick over from no to perhaps, and ride home in the risen light with your hands burning back to life around the reins, hurting like they're held in fire, and feel for 1 hour some plain animal usefulness that no one in London ever once let you feel. The men, it should be said, do not love you. They respected your grandfather, who hanged reivers in job lots, and they tell stories about Hotspur the way other counties tell stories about saints. You they regard the way men regard mild weather, gratefully without respect. Ye hear one of them once, through a stable wall, sum you up in a sentence, a soft lord, but open-handed. And you stand in the dark on the other side of the wall and find, examining the sentence from every angle, that it is fair, and that fairness is somehow worse than malice, and you carry those 5 words with all the others in the box forever. You sit in judgment at wardens' meetings on the borderline itself, English and Scots officers eyeing each other across a trestle table on the open moor, hostages exchanged for the day, every man's hand resting a little too casually near his weapon. You are, by most accounts, not very good at it. Let's be honest, since honesty is what we owe you. You are conscientious and anxious and increasingly unwell. You overspend wildly. Money runs through your hands, gifts, retainers, hospitality. The desperate open-handedness of a man buying the affection he cannot inspire, and the debts begin to pile up in a way that will haunt everything later. Your father, until his death, communicates mostly in criticism. Your wife communicates mostly in silence, punctuated by war. There are no children. There will never be children. Of the marriage bed of Henry Percy and Mary Talbot, the kindest thing history can say is that it left no evidence. Within a few years, the two of you are living apart more often than together, and each separation is a small scandal and a large relief. And it's here, in these grey years, that the news begins to arrive from the south. And I want you to feel how it arrives. Because it does not arrive as history. It arrives as gossip in fragments, weeks old, at dinner tables from travellers, in the postscripts of letters about money. The king, they say, has a new fancy, one of the Queen's ladies. First it is a rumour without a name, and you pay it no mind because the king's fancies are seasonal like lampreys. Then someone, a knight riding through from the court, warming himself at your fire, pleased to have something to trade for his supper. Someone says the name, Boleyn, Mistress Anne Boleyn, the dark one, back at court these past years and risen high in favour, and the king, they say, will not look at another woman. The fire crackles. Somewhere down the hall a door bangs. You ask, in a voice you keep perfectly level. You learned level from the best. You learned it standing on rushes with your knees shaking. Whether the lady is to be the king's mistress then, like her sister before her. And the traveller laughs and leans in with the joy of a man delivering the incredible, and says, "No, my lord, that's the wonder of it. She refuses him, refuses the king, says she'll be no man's mistress, and the king..." The knight lowers his voice as if the Cheviots were full of listeners. The king talks of making her his wife. He seeks to be rid of the queen. He calls it his great matter. The lawyers and bishops are at it like crows on a carcass. They say the cardinal is against it, or for it, or drowning in it, no man can tell. His wife, the Queen of England. That is what your foolish girl yonder in the court intends to become, and the whole world has been taken apart and rebuilt around her intention. What do you feel sitting by that fire? I don't know. Nobody knows. You never said. Men like you never say. Some poison mixture, probably, that has no name, pride and grief and vindication and horror. She was worth a kingdom. You always knew it. You said it weeping in front of the whole household. Her descent is equivalent with mine, and you were wrong only in setting the price too low. And underneath the pride, the other thing, the unworthy thing that visits at 3 a.m. It could have been me. If 2 old men had decided otherwise, she would be in the north tonight, and none of what is coming, the schism, the trials, the blood, none of it would ever happen. History itself pivoted on your broken betrothal. You are the road not taken by the entire 16th century. In 1527 your father dies. You ride south for the funeral and come back transformed, in the eyes of the law, 6th Earl of Northumberland, Warden of the East and Middle Marches, Lord of more land than some kingdoms hold. You're about 25 years old, and you are now on parchment one of the great men of England. In your body you are already going wrong. The complaints begin around now and never really stop. The ague, the fevers that come and go, the pains, the exhaustion. Your letters for the rest of your life are a litany of illness so constant that historians reading them 5 centuries later argue about the diagnosis like physicians at a bedside. Something is wrong with you, deep in the machinery, and the machinery is also carrying a grief. It is never allowed to set down, and the north is cold, and the debts are rising, and your wife's family and your own conduct are low war over money, and this is your inheritance. Everything and nothing in it. And then, in the autumn of 1530, the wheel makes its first full turn, and it is so precise, so theatrically perfect, that if a playwright invented it, you would refuse to believe him. Wolsey has fallen. The cardinal, the great crimson untouchable cardinal, has failed to get the king his divorce, and Anne and her family have spent years quietly feeding the king's disappointment, and the disappointment has ripened into destruction. Stripped of the chancellorship, stripped of York Place itself, the king takes the palace where you once slept, and gives it, in effect, to Anne. She walks the galleries where you served. The cardinal has been sent north to his archbishopric of York, to be a churchman at last in the diocese he never once visited in 20 years of holding it. And there, at Cawood Castle near York, in November 1530, he is preparing at last for his enthronement. And the king's warrant for his arrest, on charges of high treason, is given to a rider going north, and the man they choose to carry it, the man sent to lay hands on Thomas Wolsey and take him prisoner, is you. Think about who chose you, and why. The warrant could have gone to any officer of the crown. It went to the Earl of Northumberland, the great magnate of the region, yes, proper enough on the surface. But nobody at that court believed in surfaces, and neither should you. Anne Boleyn's hand is all over this appointment, and the message inside the message is written in letters a mile high. The boy you shamed is a great earl now, and he comes to your door with a warrant, and I sent him. She had said she would work the cardinal displeasure if it ever lay in her power. It lies in her power now. She has power the way other people have blood. So on the 4th of November, 1530, you ride into the courtyard of Cawood Castle in the early dark of a Yorkshire winter evening, with a company of horsemen at your back, and Master Walsh of the King's Chamber beside you, and the mud of the road is on you to the thigh, and your hands inside your gloves are stiff with cold, and something that is not cold. The household is at dinner. You know this household. You were this household. The smell that meets you in the doorway, roast meat, wood smoke, wet wool, beeswax, is the smell of your own youth, and it hits you low, under the ribs the way smells do. They bring you in. And Wolsey, old now, heavy, fallen, his crimson exchanged for plainer stuff, but still Wolsey, still the man whose voice could fill a room without rising. Wolsey comes to meet you with his arms open. He thinks this is a courtesy visit, or he chooses to perform thinking it. He was ever the better actor. He welcomes you. His old servant, his boy, now so great a lord. He gives you thanks for coming. He leads you by the hand toward the fire. He speaks of dinner, of your father's memory, of old times in the household, and you walk beside him through the warmth and the candlelight with the warrant against your chest like a coal, and your throat has closed, and the moment is here and you cannot do it, and then you do it. Cavendish was there. Cavendish saw this too. He had followed his master into ruin, and he was standing close, and he wrote it down. He says you were trembling. He says you put your hand on the old man's arm and said, in a voice so soft it was barely sound, so soft Cavendish could scarcely hear it, "My lord, I arrest you of high treason." And then you could not say anything else at all. The old man goes still. The hall goes still around the stillness. And Wolsey, give him this, even now. Wolsey recovers first, and demands to see your commission, your warrant, your authority, and you cannot answer. You stand there, the great Earl of Northumberland, gripping his arm like a drowning man gripping a spar, unable to produce words, and it is Master Walsh who has to step in and manage the business, and the cardinal submits at last not to you, but to the king's known pleasure, the way you once did, the way everyone eventually does. They keep him at Cawood some days, then move him south under guard, stage by stage toward London and the Tower, and the trial that everyone knows can end only one way. He never gets there. At Leicester Abbey, on the road, worn out, sick, 60 years old and finished, Thomas Wolsey dies in the abbot's lodging, and among the last things he says, Cavendish again, kneeling by the bed, writing it down after, is that if he had served God as diligently as he had served the king, God would not have given him over in his grey hairs. You're not there for that. You are back in the north with your fevers and your debts, having done the thing. And here is the question you get to carry now, in the box with all the others. What was it, that trembling? The vengeance of a wounded man, so long deferred that when it finally arrived he found it tasted of nothing. Or grief, arresting the tyrant of your youth and discovering that he was also, in the strange arithmetic of households, something like a father, more of one than your father ever was. Or simple horror at the lesson underneath, that this is what happens in this England to the second man in the kingdom, and if it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone, to you. You never say, you ride home, the wheel turns on, she becomes queen. You hear of it the way you hear of everything, at a distance, in fragments. The secret marriage in a turret room in the cold of January 1533. The king impatient because she's already carrying what everyone prays is a prince. Archbishop Cranmer's court pronouncing the old marriage null. And then Whitsun, the 1st of June, 1533. Anne Boleyn walking on cloth of gold through Westminster Abbey, 6 months pregnant, her dark hair worn loose down her back like a maiden's, the crown of St. Edward, the crown made for anointed kings, set on her head. They say the crowds along the road were vast and sullen, that too few caps came off, that here and there people laughed at the intertwined initials of Henry and Anne painted along the way. Ha! Ha! She noticed. She noticed everything. Always. You were not there. The north was your reason and your mercy, and in September the child. The astrologers promised a prince, the proclamations were drafted for a prince, and the child is a girl. They name her Elizabeth. The king masters his disappointment in public. The court learns a new fact without daring to say it aloud. The queen's entire position, the schism, the dead cardinal, the broken alliances, the divided country, all of it, rests on her producing a son, and she has not, and she is not young. You should be safely off stage now. You are ill, indebted, half estranged from the whole gaudy story. But the loaded gun on the table, remember the loaded gun, goes off for the first time. Your marriage, in 1532, finally and formally collapses, and Mary Talbot, in the fury of the settlement, reaches for the deadliest weapon in reach. She declares that her marriage to you was never valid at all, because you were precontracted to Anne Boleyn. Words of the present tense, spoken before witnesses, binding. She has, she says, your own admission of it, thrown at her once in a quarrel. Do you understand what that claim is in 1532? It is not about you. If Percy was contracted to Anne, then Anne is not free, was never free. And the marriage the King of England has torn Christendom apart to make is built on sand. Mary Talbot, in trying to escape her husband, has aimed a pistol at the Queen. The machinery comes down on you within days. You are summoned. You are examined. And in July 1532 you're made to swear on the Blessed Sacrament itself, before the archbishops and the King's Council, with your hand on the body of God, that there was never any contract or promise of marriage between you and Anne Boleyn. You swear it. Was it true? 500 years of historians have stood where you stood and cannot decide. Perhaps it was true. Perhaps the garden held only promises of the future, breakable things, and the oath was honest. Or perhaps you stood before God with your hand on the host and lied, because the truth would have destroyed her, and you had already failed to save her once. And this perjury, this quiet damnation taken on like a porter's load, was the only gift you had left that she could still use. You swore. She was safe. The wedding went forward, and you went north again, sicker, poorer, alone now in every sense the law allows, and for 4 years the story leaves you in peace. Peace, for you, in these years, means this: a sick man in a cold castle, managing decline. Your world contracts to the size of your ailments and your ledgers. The physicians come and go with their urine flasks and their bleeding bowls, and you let them bleed you, because that is medicine now. The lancet and the basin, the sting, and then the strange draining warmth down your arm and the light-headed peace afterward that everyone agrees is the bad humours leaving and is in fact just loss of blood. You take their purges. You wear a stone against fever that your grandmother would have sworn by. Nothing works, because nothing they have can work. Whatever is wrong in you, the egg caught in the marshes, or the kidneys, or the slow bookkeeping of sorrow, or all of it at once, is beyond the reach of the 16th century, and so you live with it as a lodger, and it slowly takes over the house. The world reaches you as noise from another room. And what noise in these years? The country you were born in is being unmade around you, statute by statute, and men you knew are dying for the crime of not keeping up. The king is supreme head of the Church of England now. The Pope is just the Bishop of Rome. The oath is going round the kingdom. Every man of consequence must swear to the new order of things, and you swear it. Of course you swear it. You would hardly know how not to swear something by now. Others don't. Word comes north in the summer of 1535 that they have executed Thomas More, the king's own friend, the cleverest man in England, beheaded on Tower Hill for a silence, for declining to say 5 words. And even in Northumberland, even among men who never met him, that news lands like a stone in a well. Everyone hears the same message inside it. There is no rank, no service, no friendship, no distance from London far enough. The reach of this reign is total now, and the tide of it is being driven. Everyone murmurs, everyone believes, fairly or not, by her. By the marriage, by the dark-eyed woman the abbeys curse under their breath. And what do you hear of her in these years? Fragments, always fragments. That she is generous to scholars and terrifying to servants. That she and the king quarrel like weather, storms and then sunshine, shouting that the whole court hears, and reconciliations the whole court also hears. That she has enemies now the way a fortress has weather, on every side, all the time. The old families who call her upstart, the Spanish party who call her worse, the Conservatives in the church, the whole vast constituency of people loyal to the discarded Queen Catherine, dying slowly in her damp exiled houses. That she miscarried once, and then again. That the king has begun to look, the court verb for it is delicate, to look elsewhere. A Seymour girl, pale, quiet, demure as a folded letter. Everything Anne is not, which is of course the entire point. In January 1536, 2 pieces of news come north almost together, and between them they seal everything, though no one can see it yet. Catherine of Aragon dies at Kimbolton, and the court wears yellow, and there is dancing, and thinking people notice quietly, that with Catherine alive, the king could never have set Anne aside without being forced back to his first wife, and that with Catherine dead, that lock is off the door. And within days, the same week the old queen is buried, Anne miscarries a child, and the child, the midwives say, was a boy, a son. The one card that beats every card in the deck, and she held it, and it slipped from her hand onto the floor of a bedchamber at Greenwich. And somewhere in Whitehall a man who has never been surprised, and has never been refused, and has now been disappointed one time too many, begins, quietly, the way he does everything cruel, through instruments, through Cromwell, through paper, begins to consider his position. You know almost none of this. You know your fevers and your rents. In the spring of 1536 you're dealing, so help you, with drainage, with the dispute about water mills, with the small mud of ordinary lordship, and your physician is trying a new regimen, and the fires are lit into May because the North does not believe in spring. Then it is May, 1536, and a letter comes north with the royal seal on it, and nothing is ever peaceful again. You know something is wrong before the letter, because everyone in England knows something is wrong. The news of that spring travels even to Northumberland at the speed of horror. The Queen arrested. The Queen in the Tower, taken by barge through the same water gate the traitors go through, on the 2nd of May, in her own country, by her own husband's order. And the charges, when they come, are of a kind no one has ever heard laid against a Queen of England, because no one has ever dared invent them before. Adultery, with 5 men, named men, one of them her own brother, and with it compassing the king's death. Treason, by imagination and by body. Let me tell you plainly, from up here in the future, what almost every serious historian now believes. It was a demolition. The evidence was assembled in about 3 weeks. The dates in the indictments do not survive checking. On several of the days the Queen is alleged to have sinned in one palace, the records show her in another, or newly risen from childbed. One of the 5 men, a young musician of her chamber named Mark Smeaton, confessed, after a night in Thomas Cromwell's house, and men in that century did not need to be told what could happen in a night in the wrong house. The other 4 denied everything to the scaffold. She had failed to give the king a son. In January she had miscarried a boy. The king's eye was already settled on Jane Seymour, and Cromwell built at speed, with the king's leave or at the king's word, a machine for making a living queen into a dead one. That is the modern verdict. Hold on to it, because no one in May 1536 is allowed to say it aloud. The letter that comes north for you is a summons. A queen can be tried only by her peers, by the lords of England sitting in judgment. 26 or so peers are being impanelled under the Duke of Norfolk, her own uncle, as Lord High Steward. The list has been drawn with care, and on the list, of course, how could it be otherwise? This century has never once missed a chance to be cruel to you with precision. On the list is the Earl of Northumberland. The man who loved her first is commanded to come and judge whether she dies. You could plead illness. God knows it would even be true. You are genuinely, seriously unwell by now. The fever's closer together, the exhaustion constant, your own letters from these years reading like dispatches from inside a failing body. Some men do find ways to be elsewhere, but a summons to a trial of this kind in this reign is not an invitation, and absence is a statement, and statements are being collected. You have spent your whole life bending. You bend once more. You go south. The journey south takes the better part of a week, and it is the worst week of your life so far, which is a competitive field. Every mile of that road you've ridden before, every mile now runs backward through your own history. You change horses at inns where men fall silent when your livery is recognised. Everyone in England knows where the peers are riding and why, and landlords serve you with a kind of horrified tenderness, as if you were riding to your own burial, which in every way this matters, you are. At night you lie in strange beds listening to the rain and doing the arithmetic. You do it 100 times. If I fall sick on the road, truly sick, witnessably sick, no. Absence will be read, and read correctly, and there are men in London right now composing lists of the insufficiently loyal. If I sit and say nothing, there is no saying nothing. Each peer must speak. If I say not guilty, and here the arithmetic always ends the same way, on the same cold ledge, her death is already purchased. The verdict is a formality being distributed among 26 men so that it belongs to no one. Your no saves nothing and destroys only you. And the last twist of it, the one that finds you at 3 a.m, your no might even hurt her, because the man who loved her first standing up to defend her honour is, to a courtroom primed with filth, not a witness. He is corroboration. They have built the trap so that even love serves it. That is the genius of this reign. You ride on south. London, when you reach it, is unbearable in a way you have no word for. The city is festive. That is the thing no one tells you about state killings. The town fills up for them. The inns are doing wonderful business. Ballad sellers are already crying broadsheets about the Queen and her lovers. The ink barely dry, the verses filthy and gleeful, a halfpenny a sheet. And everyone, absolutely everyone, from the boatmen to the fishwives to the aldermen, has a settled opinion and airs it freely. And the opinions are obscene, and you move through this carnival of certainty with your escort and your grey face. One more great lord come to do the king's business, and no one looking at you knows. Thank God the one mercy, no one knows, that the man riding past them once counted the times her sleeve brushed his in a garden. And so, the 15th of May, 1536, the King's Hall within the Tower of London. They have built a great platform in the middle so the crowd can see, and there is a crowd. Some 2,000 spectators, the mayor and aldermen, the city companies, packed in to watch, because the Crown wants this scene, wants the shame public, even if the evidence cannot bear daylight. A chair of estate for Norfolk under a cloth of state, the white staff of office in his hand, the peers ranged along their benches, and you among them in your robes, with your hands, the old trick, pressed flat against your thighs, the smell of the room, cut timber from the new scaffolding, still weeping sap, massed wool and fur and sweat, 2,000 bodies, river damp off the stones, because the tower is never dry. Somewhere under it all, stone and old iron, and the particular cold breath of that fortress, which has a smell the way a person has a voice. And then she is brought in. She comes attended, walking, and the whole hall stands to look, and you look, because not looking would itself be looked at. 14 years. The last time you truly saw her, close, she was a maid of honour with your pennies stacked in a tower under her fingertip. Now she is 35, a queen on trial for her life. 4 days after, you will have heard, sitting in a window of her prison lodging listening to the cannon, announce the condemnation of the 4 men tried before her. She is pale, they will write, but she comes in with, and this is the witness's word, several of them, with an air, composed. She makes her curtsy to the court that has assembled to kill her, and takes her chair, and looks about her at all of them. The counting look, the inventory, you would know it anywhere. Oh God, you would know it anywhere. And her eyes go along the benches of the peers, along the faces of the men who will judge her, uncle, rivals, enemies, creatures of Cromwell. Does the look stop on you? History does not say. History was watching her, not you. But you are sitting in a raised place in a hall she is scanning, and she missed nothing in her life, not once. And so you sit there, and it comes, the black gaze moving along the bench like a lamp along a wall, and there is a moment. You will never know its length, a heartbeat, an hour, when the woman from the garden looks at the boy from the garden across 14 years and 2,000 spectators and the apparatus of her own death. And then it moves on because it has to, and the trial begins. The indictment is read out, and you must sit still while it is read, while a clerk's steady voice fills the hall with filth, dates and places and names, her brother procuring, imagining the king's death, language built to make 2,000 people gasp, and they do gasp. She listens to all of it. This is attested, without moving. And when it is done, she rises and pleads in a clear voice, not guilty. There is no counsel for her. Accused traitors get none. There are no witnesses produced to be questioned. None. The confessions and depositions are simply asserted. She answers for herself, alone, for hours, and even the hostile reporters concede she answers well. Wisely, discreetly, one observer writes. As if she had never been guilty, writes another, sourly, which is the closest a man in that hall dares come to writing she is innocent. She takes each charge apart with the card-counting mind you knew before any of them. This date impossible, that man scarcely known to her, this remark twisted from a jest. It does not matter. You know it does not matter. Everyone on your bench knows. The verdict arrived in the hall before anyone did. The executioner learned this later and tried to sleep. The expert swordsman has already been sent for from Calais, days before the trial, because the outcome was known before the evidence was heard, and then Norfolk asks the peers for their verdict, and it is done in order, eldest peer or most senior first, and so along the line, each lord rising in his place one by one and saying one word, guilty, guilty, guilty. The word comes down the bench toward you like a slow fuse. You can hear your own blood by now. The hall has gone very far away. The light has gone strange. Your hands are dead things pressed against your thighs, and the word comes on, lord by lord, guilty, guilty. And there is no version of this, none, in all the branching futures where the word reaches you and anything else comes out of your mouth. If you say the other word, the true word, you do not save her. Understand that with total clarity, because you understood it. One dissenting voice acquits no one. The verdict must merely be effectively unanimous, and would be made so. You would join her in the tower by nightfall and change nothing but the number of the dead. This century has arranged things so that even your honesty would be useless, especially your honesty. The word reaches you, you stand. The hall tilts. Guilty, your voice, say in it. The one syllable into the wooden silence, added to the pile, and then the word moves past you down the bench and goes on without you. Guilty, guilty, and you sit down and something in you begins, quietly, physically, to shut. Norfolk pronounces the sentence with tears running down his face. Her uncle weeping and sentencing in the same breath, this century in a single image, death, by burning or beheading at the king's pleasure, and she stands to hear it, and does not faint, and does not weep. She says, this is recorded, that she is ready to die, and sorry only that others, innocent, must die for her. She speaks a little of the king carefully. She asks for time to prepare her soul, and somewhere in the middle of all that, as the sentence is spoken, or just after, the accounts blur, the Earl of Northumberland collapses. That is in the record. That is not a storyteller's flourish. You go down in your robes on the bench of her judges, the body doing at last in public what it has been threatening for 13 years, refusing, breaking, some final overdrawn account inside you closing. And they carry you out of the King's Hall before the proceedings are even fully done. Carried out. Past the staring crowd, 2,000 faces turning, the mayor, the alderman. Past, perhaps, you are beyond knowing, the prisoner herself, standing composed amid her guards, watching the only man in the hall whose body told the truth being removed from it. What is it, the thing that fells you? The physicians will call it his old sickness, and no doubt it is. The fevers were real. The failing body was real. But you were present in yourself long enough to hear your own voice say the word, and there is a kind of collapse that is the body casting a vote when the mouth has been outvoted. Take both explanations. They are not enemies. They take you to a house nearby and put you to bed, and the fever does the rest, and so you are absent, genuinely, medically absent, for the last days, and you learn them the way you have learned everything about her for 14 years, second-hand in fragments from voices at the door. You learn that the gun on the table fired its second shot. In the days between the sentence and the death, Archbishop Cranmer was sent to her in the Tower, and shortly afterward pronounced her marriage to the king null and void, annulled, dissolved, declared never to have existed. On what grounds? The record is deliberately murky, but one ground canvassed hard in those very days was the old one, the first one, a precontract with Henry Percy. Cromwell's men came to you about it. Even sick, even broken, they came, pressing you to say, now that it would be convenient, that there had been a contract after all. And here is the last strange, stubborn fact of your life, the small hard stone at the bottom of all that weakness. You refused. You had sworn on the sacrament in 1532, and you would not unswear it. You wrote it down. The letter survives. You referred them to your oath, taken before the archbishops, that there was no contract, and you would say the same to your death. Whatever they wanted the truth to be this week, they could not have it from you. It is not much, as last stands go. It is what you had. They found other grounds. They always find other grounds. And so by the 17th of May the law of England held two things at once, without blushing, that Anne had never been the king's wife at all, and that she must die for betraying the marriage that had never existed. No one in power saw a difficulty, or no one said so. You learn that on the 17th the 5 men died on Tower Hill, her brother first, and that on the morning of the 19th of May, 1536, on a scaffold within the Tower walls, before a small invited crowd, she made a short, careful speech, praising the king as the form required and her daughter's safety demanded, and knelt upright in the straw and prayed, and that the swordsman from Calais was merciful and quick, and that the cannon on the wharf fired to tell London it was done, and that the sound of those guns rolled up the river and over the city and into every house, including whatever house held you, a single cannon shot, heard from a sick bed. That is how it ends. That is how you learn that the girl from the garden is dead. A flat concussion over the rooftops, rattling a pane, and then the ordinary noise of London closing over it like water. They tell you afterward. People always tell you things afterward. The whole world has decided you are a man to whom things are told, the small details that will live in you longer than the great ones. That she made a jest in her last days that even her jailer wrote down with a shaking hand. That she had heard the executioner was very good, and she had a little neck, and she put her hands about it, laughing. That on the scaffold her eyes kept moving, the counting look, the inventory, working to the very last. And the swordsman, kind in his terrible trade, slipped off his shoes and called out to an assistant to distract her. Fetch my sword, so that her head turned one way while the blade came from the other, and she never saw it, and was mid-prayer and knew nothing. That the counting look was working even then. That the last thing she ever did was notice. And one detail more, the annual keep at the very bottom of the box. She left a daughter. A red-haired girl, not yet 3 years old, declared a bastard now by the same obliging law that unmade the marriage, parked away from court with her household and her tutors, a loose end everyone assumes will stay loose. Elizabeth. Hold the name a moment. You who are falling asleep with the whole map of the future open in front of you, because no one in 1536 holds it at all. The daughter of the foolish girl yonder in the court will reign over England for 45 years, and beat the Armada, and give her name to the age, and every person in that hall who said the word guilty will be dust under the pavement of her kingdom. History does not do justice, but sometimes, given 60 years or so, it does something adjacent to it. 11 days later the king married Jane Seymour. The court put on new clothes. The summer came, and you went north to die. It takes a year, but everyone can see it coming, including you. The fevers barely leave now. You're in your middle 30s and you move like an old man. Your letters are apologies for illness, for debts, for absence, for existing, one long instrument of surrender. You have no heir and will have none, and your brothers have disgraced themselves in rebellion, and so you perform your last act of bending, the strangest one of all. You make the King of England your heir. You convey the whole vast Percy inheritance, Alnwick, Warkworth, the castles, the marches, 300 years, to the crown, to him. Historians still argue over why. Spite toward your brothers, despair, pressure, some final exhausted wish to be at last approved of by the power that broke you. Perhaps all of it. The unthrift waster signing away the north with a shaking hand. You die at the end of June, 1537, at Hackney, then a village outside London, in a borrowed house, about 13 months after the cannon fired. You are perhaps 35, the same age she was. They bury you in the parish church there without much ceremony, and the title sleeps for 20 years until a nephew revives it. And the world, which had already stopped watching you long before, moves on entirely. That is the life. Let me hold it up to the light once gently, before we put it away for the night. He was not a hero. He never once won. He loved and was overruled, promised and was made to unpromise, swore and may have lied, judged and said the false word with the true word locked in his chest. And his body, which could not fight, did the only honest thing available to it and fell down in front of everyone. If you go looking for him in the histories, he's a footnote in other people's chapters. Wolsey's chapter, Anne's chapter, the King's endless chapter. A weak man, the older books say, and close the file. but lie here in the dark and try the arithmetic yourself. He stood in a hall full of power at 21, weeping, and argued her worth to the Lord Chancellor of England when silence would have cost him nothing. He carried a warrant to his old master's door and could barely speak the arrest for grief. He put his hand on the body of God and said the thing that kept her safe, whatever it cost his soul, and 4 years later, when the same lie or the same truth would have served her killers, he refused to sell it to them, and at her trial, where 26 of the greatest men in England sat in their furs and said the word they were told to say, exactly one body in that hall broke rather than bear it. Weakness, the books say. You can decide for yourself some other day, when you're not so tired. Tonight it is enough to know that he existed, that before the crown and the schism and the sword from Calais, before any of it, there was just a worried young man in a cold palace, and a sharp-eyed girl with calluses on her fingers, and a wet afternoon, and a card game, and a hand touching a hand under a table. History is enormous, and it is made of exactly that. Nothing else. Small warm moments, and the machinery that grinds them. The machinery is gone now. Hold on to that, because it's true and it helps. The cardinal is gone. The king is gone. The tower still stands, but it is a museum with a gift shop, and school children yawn through it on rainy Tuesdays and buy pencils. York Place became Whitehall, and burned and vanished under government offices. Hever Castle still keeps its moat and its orchards, and tourists walk the gardens where a family once waited out a disgrace. And at Alnwick, in the north, there are Percys in the castle to this day. The name outlived everything, outlived the man who thought he had ended it, and the border he policed is just a line on a green hill where sheep graze on both sides and nobody burns anything. Centuries will pass, have passed. The London he knew changed beyond recognition. The streets paved and lit, the river bridged a dozen times over, the plagues conquered, the scaffolds dismantled. But people still live there. Still fall in love with exactly the wrong person at exactly the wrong time. Still lie awake at night doing the arithmetic of what they can afford to feel. Some things don't change. The human heart doesn't change. The need for rest at the end of a long day, that doesn't change either. And you have been carrying his life for a while now, and it's heavy, and you can set it down. So set it down. Let the great hall empty. Let the crimson fade to grey. Let the cannon sound roll away down the river until it is only a river, only water moving in the dark, the way it moved before any of them were born and moves tonight while you lie there listening to nothing. You're warm enough, you're safe enough, you're tired enough. You have a bed and a blanket and a door that no one is going to knock on with a summons. That's more than kings could promise their own queens. That's enough. Tomorrow there will be things to do. Tomorrow there will be small tasks and small worries and the ordinary weather of an ordinary life. But that's tomorrow. Right now there is only this room and this breath and the next one slower. The same as last night. The same as every night. The same as all the nights stretching out ahead. Quiet and unremarkable and yours. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way it finally took him. The worrier, the bender, the man who loved her first, gently in the end, with the accounts closed and nothing left to carry. Let the sounds fade, let the thoughts slow and soften, and finally stop. You've earned this rest. Take it, and dream of whatever dreams may come. Good night.